After 23 years in the military, most of them spent in places that don't show up on maps, I was done. Done with orders. Done with briefings. Done with the long silences between each heartbeat when you're waiting for a breach to go wrong. My wife, Ellie, had waited long enough for a quiet life, and I owed her one. So we bought a house tucked away in a quiet cul-de-sac on the outskirts of Pinebrook Estates, a picture-perfect neighborhood with white fences, matching mailboxes, and more smiles than seemed statistically likely. It was the kind of place that made people say things like charming and wholesome, and for a while, I believed it. After Afghanistan Fallujah, and 5 years training Special Forces recruits at Fort Bragg, I didn't think anything suburban could faze me. I was wrong. The house itself was beautiful. Ellie fell in love the second she stepped onto the wide, wraparound porch. It had a small garden, an oak tree she could hang wind chimes from, and a backyard that backed up to a nature reserve. I loved the silence of it. No hum of choppers, no barking orders, just birds and the distant sound of lawn sprinklers. We moved in during the early spring. Neighbors waved as we unloaded boxes. The guy 2 houses down offered to lend me his power washer before even asking my name. Kids rode scooters in the street without looking up. There were gnomes in every third lawn, as if placed by some unspoken suburban covenant. Then came the welcome packet. It was thick, at least an inch. Welcome to the Pinebrook Estates Homeowners Association. The cover read in embossed gold lettering. Inside were pages of rules, guidelines, diagrams, and color swatches. I remember thumbing through it while Ellie read it aloud at the kitchen island, her voice equal parts amused and concerned. Garbage bins must be kept out of public view at all times. No unapproved flags or signage may be displayed outside. All exterior home modifications must be pre-approved by the Architectural Committee. I chuckled. Looks like the Marines had fewer rules. Ellie raised an eyebrow. You ever get fined for putting up a wind chime? I shook my head. Not unless it was rigged with tripwire. We brushed it off. At the time, it felt silly, like a parody of itself. We had no idea how seriously some people took that rulebook, or how far they'd go to enforce it. Our first real interaction with the HOA came 3 weeks later. Ellie planted a row of lavender bushes along the walkway and installed a small flag holder by the mailbox. She chose a flag that meant something to us, a navy blue field with a white eagle symbol of the 101st Airborne. Nothing political. No slogans, just heritage. The letter arrived 2 days later. Violation notice, unauthorized flag display. Remove immediately or face escalating fines. It was signed in bold black ink, Karen Aldridge, president of the Pinebrook HOA. I assumed it was a mistake. Maybe some intern typed it up. I called the number listed and left a message, polite but direct, explaining the flag was military insignia, not an ad, not a statement, just a tribute. No one called back. 2 days later, Ellie found the flag on the ground. The mount had been unscrewed. I tightened it back and added security screws and kept my mouth shut. I told myself it wasn't worth it. Not yet. Then came the garden note. In the mailbox again. This time it cited non-compliant plant height for the lavender bushes. Ellie had trimmed them to 16 inches just as the guidelines suggested, but somehow they were now an obstruction. I could see the stress start to creep into her. She'd been so excited to finally build something that was ours, and I'd promised her peace. So I attended the next HOA meeting. It was held in a spotless community hall where everyone sat in neat rows like students at a school assembly. Karen Aldridge stood at the front like she was giving a TED Talk on neighborhood perfection. Her hair was taut in a bun that looked painful. Every word she spoke had the brittle confidence of someone used to never being questioned. When it was my turn to speak, I stood. Good evening. My name's Mark Light. My wife and I just moved into 318 Hollow Pine Lane. We've received 2 violation notices. I'm hoping to clarify. Karen cut me off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you, Mark. All enforcement actions are based strictly on the HOA handbook. If you'd like to appeal, there's a form online. I read the handbook. I replied evenly. Neither the flag nor the plants violate any of it. So I'd like clarification. Her smile sharpened. Then perhaps you're interpreting it differently. We maintain aesthetic standards to protect property values. Someone in the audience clapped one of her lackeys, no doubt. I looked around and saw polite smiles, forced nods, and the subtle kind of a fear I used to see in places where one wrong move could cost you everything. Karen continued as if I hadn't spoken. Let's move on to the next item. I sat down slowly. Ellie squeezed my hand. I leaned over and whispered, "This isn't about flags or lavender." She nodded. "It's about control." After the meeting, we walked back to the car in silence. The night air was cool, but my jaw was tight. I recognized what I saw in Karen. Not leadership, not community care. It was command lust. The kind I'd only ever seen in corrupt officers or foreign warlords. The kind that gets worse when you ignore it. But I wasn't ready for war. Not yet. I still believed this place could be home. What I didn't know was that Karen had already marked us as a threat, and she had people willing to do more than write letters. I started to notice them more after that meeting. Those little signals that something wasn't quite right beneath the manicured surface of Pinebrook Estates. At first, they were subtle: a car idling for too long at the corner of our street, a man in a maintenance vest who always seemed to be adjusting the same sprinkler head on our block neighbors, who had once waved, now barely making eye contact. I'd seen this kind of thing before in villages where insurgents had wormed their way into every layer of authority. You learn to recognize when fear is doing the talking behind someone's eyes. Ellie called them Karen's ghosts. She has watchers, Ellie said one morning over coffee. "You saw the guy with the drone yesterday, right?" I nodded. "Flew it right over our yard. No license sticker." She looked at me over her mug. "Is that even legal?" "Invasion of privacy, if it's recording. But good luck proving it." A week passed, then two, and the notices kept coming. Each one stranger than the last. One cited the unauthorized wind chimes Ellie had hung from the porch. Another claimed our recycling bin was visible from the street for longer than allowed, 22 minutes to be exact. There was even a formal complaint about my truck parked in the driveway because its color did not blend with the visual palette of the community. Karen's signature was on every single one. When I finally cornered our next-door neighbor, Dennis, a quiet man in his 60s, I asked him bluntly, "Why does no one speak up?" He hesitated, scanning the yard like someone might be listening. Then he sighed. "You didn't hear it from me," he whispered, "but Karen's got people on her board who work in code enforcement and zoning. She can have your permits delayed, your remodels revoked. She got the Nguyens evicted over a tool shed. No one wants to be next." "But this isn't legal," I said. Dennis chuckled bitterly. "Doesn't have to be. She makes it hard enough you give up. That's her game." Ellie grew quieter as the weeks passed. She stopped gardening. She only opened the blinds halfway. Her joy, this soft, patient joy I'd loved since the day we met, was dimming. And I hated it. "I didn't sign up to be bullied," she told me one night as we sat on the porch steps. "I just wanted a place to feel safe." "You are safe," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt how hollow they sounded. It was that night I noticed the same black SUV circling our street for the third time. It passed, slowly, headlights off. I memorized the license plate. The next morning, I checked the surveillance cams I'd quietly installed around the house. The same vehicle had idled outside between 1:14 and 1:27 a.m. I copied the footage to a secure drive. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was tactical. I started digging. Karen Aldridge had no military background. No government ties I could see. But she ran Pinebrook's HOA like a private army. Her vice president, Doug Meeker, had 2 citations for aggressive enforcement tactics in another community across town. The treasurer, a man named Louis Brandt, had a quiet background in consulting the kind with shell companies and privacy shields. None of them had kids. None of them were married. And all of them had filed legal action against residents in the past 5 years. What stood out most was the pattern intimidation through fines escalating into code violations, which then opened the door for forced inspections, then eviction threats. Ellie didn't know I'd started making a dossier. I didn't want to worry her more than she already was. But Karen must have sensed something had shifted because the HOA's tactics suddenly escalated. We received a formal notice of non-compliance, alleging we were operating a business out of our home. A complete fabrication. I had no clients, no signage. The most action my garage saw was me tuning up my truck or sorting old gear. The kicker, the notice came stapled to a printout of a LinkedIn profile I'd deactivated years ago, one that listed training consultancy as part of my transition to civilian life. Karen was digging. She'd crossed from HOA president to full-blown oppressor. I attended another meeting. I walked in wearing a plain black polo jeans and boots. No insignia, no posture. I wanted to look like a retired man with too much time and not enough patience. The room was full again. Karen stood at the front, like a preacher behind a pulpit. I waited until the public comment section, then I stood. My wife's been harassed. My property has been surveilled. My privacy has been violated. I have footage of vehicles loitering, and I have printed copies of every notice you've sent, all outside of the scope of HOA authority. Karen raised her hand with a fake smile. Sir, this is not the forum. I wasn't finished, I said calmly. The room went silent. I have reported the harassment to local law enforcement. And starting next week, I will be submitting formal complaints to the state's HOA Oversight Commission. If you continue to target my family, I will treat it as what it is. Organized harassment. Someone clapped. I didn't turn to see who. Karen's eyes narrowed. I'd advise you, she said with icy precision, to be careful with accusations you can't prove. That was the moment I realized she wasn't going to back down. Not ever. This wasn't just about rules or flags or bins. This was personal. I leaned in just slightly. You picked the wrong house. Her smile vanished. On the way home, Ellie asked what had happened. I told her most of it, not all. What I didn't tell her was that I'd seen the shift in Karen's face, the flicker of something like fear or challenge. She didn't know yet what I'd trained men to do in the worst conditions imaginable. How I'd taught soldiers to read terrain watch for patterns and dismantle hostile networks without ever firing a shot. Karen had started something, and I was done watching. The morning it happened was strangely quiet, too quiet. I was up early, sipping black coffee by the window, watching the mist rise off the yard. Ellie was still asleep upstairs. I remember thinking it was finally the kind of morning I used to dream about during my last deployment, peaceful ordinary. The kind where the loudest thing was the birds. The kind I wanted for her. But then, at exactly 7:06 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Not the polite kind. Not even the loud, obnoxious kind. This was the kind of knock that came from someone who'd never been told no. Someone who assumed the door would open just because they wanted it to. I didn't answer right away. I watched through the peephole first. 3 men. One wore an orange vest meant to look like a utility worker. The second had a clipboard. The third stood back, arms crossed, wearing tactical sunglasses at dawn. Not a good sign. I opened the door just wide enough to keep the chain on. Can I help you? I asked. Clipboard guy stepped forward. Morning, sir. We're here from the Pine Brook HOA Enforcement Subcommittee. We've had some reports of unapproved modifications on your property. We'll need to do a walkthrough. I raised an eyebrow. You'll need a warrant. He laughed like I'd told a joke. Sir, it's standard protocol. The bylaws don't supersede constitutional law, I said flatly. Try again. Vest guy stepped forward. We're authorized by the HOA charter to access exterior spaces. You've been watching my house. You think I wouldn't recognize a reconnaissance sweep? I opened the door, fully stepping into the sunlight. Let me make this real clear. You step onto my land without legal cause again, and I won't be filing a complaint. I'll be filing charges. Sunglasses man finally spoke. You think you're the first tough guy we've dealt with? No, I said, staring straight at him. But I'm probably the last one you'll try. They left, but not before clipboard guy muttered something under his breath. I memorized every detail of their faces, their posture, their hesitation. These weren't HOA volunteers. These were contractors, maybe private security types, maybe worse. And Karen had sent them. When I told Ellie, she paled. They're trying to provoke you, she whispered. Don't take the bait. But this wasn't bait, this was escalation. That afternoon, we found a notice pinned to our front door with a thumbtack, not even in an envelope, notice of non-compliance, escalation, failure to cooperate with HOA inspection. It included a fine, $750, due in 10 days, threat of lien attached. That's when I called my old friend, Peter Jennings. Pete and I went through Ranger School together. He'd left the service to become an attorney, now a partner in a firm that specialized in HOA abuse cases. We hadn't spoken in over a year. But when he picked up and I told him the headline HOA thugs tried to enter my property, attacked my wife's rights. He didn't hesitate. Send me everything he said. All the letters, footage, recordings. I'll start digging into their tax status and enforcement clauses. While Pete worked on the legal side, I got busy on the tactical one. I set up a perimeter of hidden trail cameras, high-resolution night vision motion activated. I dug out my old field notebook and began logging every incident date, time, names, photos, license plates. It was what we used to call an observation ledger, a methodical dismantling of enemy routines. Meanwhile, Karen seemed to sense the resistance. She showed up at our door the next day. She didn't knock this time. She stood there, arms folded, flanked by two new HOA officers, both in black polos, with embroidered badges that didn't belong to any government agency. Ellie opened the door before I could stop her. Mrs. Aldridge. Ellie said, her voice calm but brittle. We've asked for no unannounced visits. Karen smiled, fake and wide. Oh, this isn't a visit. It's a courtesy. We've noticed a growing pattern of hostility. We'd prefer to resolve this neighbor to neighbor. I stepped in behind Ellie. You mean you'd prefer not to face legal action? Karen tilted her head. Mr. Callahan, no one here wants to escalate. You already have, I said. Your people have trespassed, intimidated, filed false claims. What you're doing is racketeering under federal law. She blinked just once, but it was enough. I'm not afraid of playground threats, she said. You think because you've got a military record you can intimidate the board? I smiled for the first time. I don't need to intimidate anyone. I just know how to finish what you start. Her eyes darkened. Be careful who you threaten. Be careful who you provoke, I replied. She left in silence, but I knew it wasn't over. She challenged me in my own home in front of my wife. That was the last warning shot. That night, I double-checked the cameras and backed up all footage. I reviewed HOA meeting transcripts. Yes, I'd started recording those too, and filed a formal complaint with the County Code Enforcement Office. Pete confirmed they had enough for an initial cease and desist letter. But I wasn't just playing defense anymore. I started preparing for the next move because I had a feeling Karen was planning something that went beyond notices and fines, something she'd regret. And I knew I wouldn't be the one caught off guard. I didn't sleep much that week. Neither did Ellie. It wasn't just the stress, it was the sense of something pressing against the edge of our lives. Something that didn't belong in a peaceful suburb, but had wormed its way in and now watched us from every blind spot. The silence of the neighborhood had shifted. It no longer felt serene. It felt staged, too still, like a trap waiting for movement. At 2:13 a.m. one night, the security cameras sent a motion alert to my phone. Two figures, both wearing dark clothing and gloves, approached the rear fence line. One of them pointed to the camera above the garage, then pulled something from his jacket, what looked like a laser pointer. The image jittered, blurred briefly, and then cleared. They didn't disable the camera. They just tested if we'd react. I didn't. I watched them. They stayed for 4 minutes, scanning, measuring. One of them pointed to a corner of our backyard, the old tool shed. Then they left the same way they came, slipping through the hedge behind the Aldridge property. I downloaded the footage and sent it to Pete with the message, "They're getting bolder." He called me the next morning. "Mark, this isn't standard HOA intimidation. This is targeted harassment, surveillance, trespassing, possibly even conspiracy. If these guys are acting under Karen's direction, and we can prove it, you've got a civil suit and a criminal complaint." "I'm not looking for a lawsuit," I said. "I'm looking to end it." Pete paused. "Then document everything. No confrontations, no escalation. Let them hang themselves." He didn't know me as well as he thought. I'd spent decades training men not to wait for permission when the threat became real. And this was real. That weekend, Ellie went to visit her sister in Atlanta. I told her she needed the break. She didn't argue. The moment she left, I turned the house into a trap. I didn't set weapons, this wasn't a battlefield. But I did rig the perimeter with motion-detecting lights, sound-triggered alerts, and hidden microphones. I placed decoy boxes marked confidential inside the shed, each one wired with RFID tags that would ping if moved. I installed a new camera with thermal imaging overlooking the backyard and a second hidden one behind a birdhouse. Then I waited. The second night they came back. This time, it was 3 of them. No attempt at subtlety. They moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing someone in power had promised them protection. They didn't go for the shed. They circled the house. At 3:22 a.m., the front porch light clicked on automatically. One man ducked. Another waved toward the camera and flipped it off with both hands. The third pulled something from his pocket, a small canister, and sprayed it across the porch steps. I couldn't make out the contents right away, but I'd recognize that oily sheen anywhere. Paint remover. They were defacing our home. I called the non-emergency police line and reported trespassers. The dispatcher said an officer would respond when available. They never came. The next morning, I found a strip of porch wood warped and blistered from the chemical. Ellie's wind chimes were gone, torn off, left in pieces in the hydrangeas. That was when something cold inside me hardened. I filed a report with county police anyway, photographs, camera, footage, timestamps. But I also made 3 flash drives of the footage and dropped them off at 3 different places: Pete's office, a friend who worked at the sheriff's department, and a safety deposit box I hadn't used in years. I knew what Karen was doing. She was hoping to scare us out, break us psychologically. But what she didn't know was that I'd spent too many years in places where fear was a currency. I knew how to stop paying. 2 days later, I spotted a white van with tinted windows parked across from our house. No plates, no markings. It didn't move for 6 hours. I walked right up to it with a thermos of coffee, knocked on the glass, and waited. The window rolled down 2 inches. A young man with buzzed hair and mirrored glasses peered out. "You lost?" I asked. He didn't answer. I smiled. "Next time, tell Karen she might want to send someone who knows how to blend in. This is amateur hour." He rolled the window back up. I walked away, but I took a photo of the VIN etched into the windshield corner before I did. That night, someone left an envelope taped to our door. No return address. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. One was a printed photograph Ellie at the farmer's market 2 weeks prior, smiling at a vendor. The second was a blown-up Google Maps satellite view of our house with red ink circles around the garage and backyard shed. The third was a typed message, all caps. "Some people don't belong in this neighborhood. Leave before it gets worse." No signature, no HOA letterhead this time. This wasn't official HOA business. This was something else. I sat at the kitchen table with the pages spread out before me. I didn't flinch. I didn't rage. I just felt a slow, precise clarity settle over me, the same kind I used to feel when a mission's objective became crystal clear. I wasn't dealing with neighborhood politics anymore. I was facing an organized intimidation campaign run by a woman so drunk on power she was willing to hire shadows to do her dirty work. And I was done being reactive. That night, I dusted off my old field bag. It still smelled like canvas and adrenaline. I pulled out the logbooks, the mapping tools, the old school radios, and set them in a neat row. Karen thought she was the predator in this neighborhood. She had no idea she'd just stepped into a different kind of battlefield. Ellie came home on a Tuesday. She walked through the front door holding a bag of oranges from her sister's garden and smiling like she'd finally had a few days of real rest. I almost didn't want to tell her what had happened while she was gone. But she saw the patch on the porch right away, the warped wood, the slight discoloration, even after I'd sanded and sealed it. "Did they come here?" she asked, voice low. I nodded. "They circled the house, left a message taped to the door. Someone sprayed solvent on the wood. They took your wind chimes." Her jaw clenched. Karen did this. "No, but she sent them." Ellie sat on the porch steps and stared out into the street. Her shoulders were tight, her hands clasped together like she was praying, but her eyes were hard. "Mark," she said without looking at me, "are we in danger?" I took a breath before I answered. "Not if I stay ahead of them." And I am. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. I was tracking everything, building the file, drawing the net tighter. But it was moving faster now, bolder, less subtle. Karen had realized her bureaucracy tactics weren't working, and she'd unleashed the dogs. 3 days later, they crossed a line that changed everything. It was a Friday afternoon. I had driven into town to pick up a replacement thermal lens and meet Pete at the courthouse to hand off the most recent round of footage. Ellie stayed home planning to do something normal. She said she wanted to plant spring bulbs in the backyard. Something quiet. Healing. I was in line at the clerk's office when I got the call. Not a number I recognized. No caller ID. Just a voice when I picked up a stranger's voice. "Your wife's in the hospital," the man said quickly. "County ER. You should come, now." My hand clenched around the phone. "Who is this?" Click! The line went dead. I drove like a man possessed. Every muscle in my body was a live wire. I had survived firefights, IEDs, and raids in cities where the only rule was chaos. But nothing, not even the sound of mortar shells, hit me like those words had. Your wife's in the hospital. I found her in a room with bright white lights and a slow beeping monitor. She had a bandage across her cheek, bruises blooming on her arms like spreading shadows, and a nurse hovering nearby trying to coax her to drink water. When she saw me, she burst into tears. I was in the yard, she whispered between sobs. I saw them coming down the side gate. I thought maybe they were lost or from the HOA again. I told them to leave. One of them shoved me. The other grabbed my phone. When I tried to call you, I tried. My blood felt like fire under my skin. I sat beside her and gently held her hand. You did everything right. Everything. She cried harder. The nurse told me she had been brought in by an anonymous 911 call. Said the caller refused to leave a name. Ellie was found conscious, but disoriented, curled up near the back fence. The police came eventually. I gave them a calm, precise report. Names I suspected. License plates, video logs, time-stamped threats. I handed them a USB drive with a full backup of everything. They took it and said they'd look into it, but I knew the look in their eyes. Overwhelmed, understaffed, politely detached. So I called Pete, told him everything. He didn't hesitate. This just moved into felony assault, he said. I'm going straight to the DA. You have enough now for a restraining order at the very least. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat beside Ellie's hospital bed and stared out the window, watching the blinking lights on the IV pump. My mind drifted to the training fields at Fort Bragg. To the war games, the simulations, the drills that began with one line. What do you do when the enemy crosses the wire? This was it. This was that moment. The enemy had crossed my wire. The next morning, I brought Ellie home. I moved her bed downstairs and turned the guest room into a recovery suite. My old friend, Tom, an Army medic, drove up from 2 counties away to help set it up. He brought medical-grade supplies, a collapsible cot, and enough food to last a week. Tom took one look at the bruise on Ellie's shoulder and didn't ask a single question. He just said, "Tell me what you need." I told him time, and a second pair of eyes. He nodded. You got it. We set up a secondary perimeter, multiple sensor layers, frequency-based alarms, redundant camera systems with hidden feeds. I contacted 2 more former trainees, guys I trusted with my life, and brought them in quietly. No uniforms, no weapons, just eyes and ears. Karen had unleashed a storm. She had no idea I'd spent my entire life learning how to ride lightning. The shift was subtle, but real. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was building a forward operating base, gathering intel, analyzing movement, countering every threat before it took root. But I also had something Karen didn't. Community. Ellie's injury lit a fire under people who'd been too scared to speak. Dennis came over with cookies and a flash drive of his own, a video he'd taken weeks ago of HOA officers shouting at another resident's teen son. The Nguyens dropped off screenshots of suspicious messages they'd received after they complained about fencing regulations. A single mother down the street shared a photo of her car tires slashed the day after she refused to join Karen's voluntary compliance subcommittee. One by one they came, quietly, but clearly, with proof. Karen had built her power on fear, but now her victims were forming a different kind of army, and I was more than ready to lead it. The night Ellie came home, the house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a recovery tent. The warmth was gone and the air inside hung too still, as if even it was afraid to move. Ellie was pale, her steps cautious, her voice soft. She wouldn't admit it, but I saw it in the way she flinched when the doorbell rang, the way her eyes darted to the window whenever headlights flashed through the blinds. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her while she slept, one arm curled around a heating pad. Her lips parted in shallow breaths. My hands were folded on my lap, but my knuckles were white. This woman had waited for me during deployments that broke other marriages. She'd written me letters while I was in places where paper and ink felt more real than the ground beneath our feet. She was the first person I saw when I stepped off the C-17 from Iraq, standing with a handmade sign and tears streaking her cheeks. And now someone had laid hands on her. I went into the garage. It had always been more workshop than storage space, but that night it became something else entirely. I laid out everything: maps of the neighborhood, printouts of HOA filings, Karen's property records, surveillance logs, timestamps, Incident reports. I pinned every photo to a corkboard, drew lines with string-layered events with precision. This wasn't paranoia. This was recon. And the enemy had left a trail a rookie could follow. Tom came in with 2 cups of coffee and stood silently as he watched me work. "You're going full red cell," he muttered. "You planning a takedown?" I didn't look up. "I'm planning to end this." He set the coffee down beside me. "You remember Afghanistan 2009, that village with the fake clinic?" I nodded. Guy running it was just like her, he said. Power trip, with no oversight. Ran the whole region through intimidation. Until we figured out the power lines he was stealing electricity from weren't even his. That made me pause. "What are you saying?" "People like Karen build empires on illusion. You kick out the foundation, the whole thing falls." He was right. I turned back to the board. Karen's name was on every property notice, every violation form, every escalation. But something didn't add up. The HOA charter had 3 executive signatures, Karen Lewis Brandt and Doug Meeker. But I'd never seen either of them in person, not once. At every meeting, Karen was alone at the podium. Why? I did a quick search on the county clerk's site. There it was. The HOA leadership was supposed to hold elections every 2 years with full community disclosure. The last election on record was nearly 7 years ago. No ballots, no minutes, no record of nomination. It wasn't an HOA. It was a dictatorship. Pete confirmed it this next morning after I sent him the files. That's a massive violation. He said, his voice crackling through the phone. "You've got them on procedural fraud, operational misconduct, and possibly financial embezzlement. That escrow account they pull fines into, it's not under HOA control. It's listed under a private LLC." "What LLC?" "Pinebrook Community Aesthetics Group, LLC. Owned by, you guessed it, Karen Aldridge." I sat back in my chair, stunned. She was funneling HOA fines into her own company. Every violation, every bogus fee, every compliance surcharge, all of it was money into her personal fund. Tax-free, unregulated, and hidden behind the false legitimacy of neighborhood governance. It was a shell game, but I still needed the final piece to prove she was behind the physical attacks. That she'd hired those men, given the orders, or at least signed off. So I baited her. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I submitted a formal request to speak on record, citing community-wide safety concerns. I knew she couldn't refuse. It would look suspicious. I wanted her to feel confident, even smug. I wanted her to think she still had control. What she didn't know was that I'd invited the press. A local investigative journalist named Lydia Hartman had been covering suburban HOA corruption for 2 years. Her last expose blew the lid off a neighborhood in all Arizona, where residents were being fined for having more than one car in the driveway. When I sent her the footage, the documents, and a map of the Shell LLC connections, her response was immediate: "I'll be there." So were half the neighbors. For the first time since we moved in, the Pinebrook Community Center was packed. People stood along the walls. Whispers buzzed like electricity through the air. Karen entered like she always did, chin-high, pearls tight against her throat, a clipboard clutched in one hand like a weapon. But I saw the flicker in her eyes the moment she noticed the reporter, the cameras, the unfamiliar faces. She tried to call order, but I stood before she could speak. "I'd like to make a statement. This is not an open forum. I filed the request. You approved it." "Don't worry, I'll keep it brief." She froze. The room went silent. I clicked a remote. The projector screen behind her lit up. The first image, a photo of Ellie's bruised face in the hospital. Gasps, whispers. One woman covered her mouth. The second image, the masked men at our rear fence line, time-stamped. The third, a scanned copy of the threat letter. Then I spoke. "For months, my wife and I have endured harassment surveillance, and just days ago, assault. We've documented every incident, every camera, every letter, every fine. And it all traces back to one person." Karen shifted in her chair, jaw tightening. I advanced the slide again. A spreadsheet, fines paid by residents over the past 4 years totaling over $200,000. All of it redirected into a private LLC under Karen's name. "You didn't just abuse your role," I said. "You weaponized it. You turned this neighborhood into your kingdom. But you forgot one thing." I walked to the front, standing just inches from her. "You messed with the wrong wife." Lydia stood. "Ms. Aldridge, care to comment for the record?" Karen opened her mouth. No sound came out. And then someone in the back shouted, "Resign." Another followed, "We want our money back." Chaos erupted. Karen tried to speak over the noise, but it was too late. The illusion had shattered, and I wasn't finished yet. The meeting didn't end. It imploded. As the crowd shouted, some residents demanded refunds. Others screamed for Karen's arrest. Two board members, who'd never shown their faces, Lewis and Doug, finally appeared, emerging from the wings like stage villains, pulled reluctantly into the spotlight. Both of them wore the same panicked expression, caught, cornered, exposed. Karen tried to call for order, banging her clipboard on the podium, but the momentum was lost. People weren't afraid of her anymore. I watched it happen in real time, the moment when fear crumbled into anger and anger began to sharpen into resolve. Lydia was already interviewing neighbors near the exit as I walked past her. She looked up at me, eyes lit with journalistic fire. "You realize this is going to be statewide news by morning." "Good," I said. "They need to know who she really is." Ellie was waiting for me at home, seated with Tom and one of our neighbors, Miriam, a retired teacher who'd brought over fresh soup and a folder full of old HOA meeting minutes she'd saved just in case. "You were right," she said quietly. "They were waiting for someone to go first." I nodded. "They're not waiting anymore." I spent the next 48 hours assembling what I called the counter-strike packet. It wasn't violent. It wasn't revenge. It was pure clinical exposure, something I'd learned in covert fieldwork when a corrupt actor hides behind bureaucracy. You don't attack their face, you remove their mask. The packet included a compiled timeline of every HOA interaction Ellie and I had endured. Surveillance footage meticulously labeled and with incident summaries. Financial documents from Pete showing Karen's fake LLC, including tax filings, routing numbers, and how resident fines were misdirected. A list of names, neighbors who had come forward with their own stories, most willing to testify if needed. Legal codes from the state homeowner law book cross-referenced to each HOA violation and fraud. I sent the full digital version to Pete, the local DA Lydia, and a contact at the Yacht State Attorney General's office. Then I sent redacted versions to every single home in Pinebrook, printed and delivered by hand, with the help of Tom and 2 volunteers. The packet was titled simply, "What the HOA Doesn't Want You to Know." By the next morning, the cul-de-sac felt different. Garage doors opened earlier. Neighbors waved more freely. Kids played without looking over their shoulders. For the first time since we moved in, Pinebrook actually felt like a community, not a kingdom. Karen didn't respond. Not publicly. Not yet. But I knew she was watching. Her silence was her last weapon. And I wasn't going to give her time to sharpen it. I filed a petition for emergency board removal under our state's HOA reform statutes. Pete helped me draft it, and within hours of submission, it triggered a compliance review by the HOA's parent regulatory body. Their response was swift. An audit team would arrive in 3 days. That's when Karen struck back. Late that night, while Ellie slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, I received an alert from the driveway cam. I watched the footage unfold in real time. 2 men, faces covered, approached the house with a 5-gallon bucket. One poured its contents across our front porch motor oil by the smell, and the other raised a metal pipe toward the window before spotting the blinking red LED from the corner camera. They bolted, but they left behind what I needed most: a partial license plate, tire treads in the soft soil, and their images, clear, high-definition, time-stamped, and undeniable. I called the police and gave them everything. To my surprise this time, they acted. I met Officer Ramirez at the station the next morning. He was young, but sharp. When I showed him the footage and evidence trail, he nodded slowly. "This matches a report from 2 months ago in Oakwood Glen," he said. "Similar HOA harassment case. Same kind of enforcement goons. Different community, but same MO." I leaned forward. "You think Karen's network runs deeper?" Ramirez nodded. "Could be. We're going to run the plates, see if we can connect them to any private security firms or shell companies. You've done most of the work already." I left the station with something I hadn't felt in months: momentum. Back at home, neighbors gathered on our lawn. Dennis, Miriam, the Nuns, a young couple named Taylor, and Jen. They brought more evidence: photos, emails, text messages. It was like a dam had broken and truth poured out from every direction. That evening, Lydia released her article online. Asra, the Queen of Pinebrook. How one HOA president turned a neighborhood into her empire. Within an hour, the community forum exploded. Hundreds of comments. People from other neighborhoods sharing similar stories. Some even recognized the men from the camera footage. Karen was no longer just a local tyrant. She was a statewide scandal. By the next day, 3 things happened. 1. A temporary injunction was filed against Karen and her board, freezing all HOA activities until the audit concluded. 2. 2 of the men from the attack video were arrested. One confessed to working security jobs for a private HOA contractor but couldn't name a company. The lead detective confirmed they were opening an investigation into unlicensed enforcement operations across multiple neighborhoods. 3. Karen disappeared. Her home was dark, her car gone. Mail piled up on her porch. No one had seen her since the article went live. Part of me wondered if she'd fled. Another part of me hoped she'd stayed watching from the shadows, forced to face the empire she built crumbling under its own weight. That night, I stood in the backyard beneath the stars, breathing in the cool air. Ellie beside me. "It's not over yet," she said. No, I agreed. But for the first time, we're not alone. The neighborhood had changed. It was still healing, still raw. But something powerful had replaced the fear. A collective refusal to be bullied again. And now, as the audit loomed and the legal walls closed in on Karen's operation, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just protecting my wife anymore. I was protecting every family she had tried to break. The morning of the audit was unseasonably bright. Ellie made coffee while I went over my notes one last time. She was walking without the cane now, slowly, carefully, but upright. Every step she took seemed to return a piece of her spirit. It wasn't just physical healing. It was something deeper. There was fire behind her eyes again, the same fire I saw when she used to wait for me at the airport gates with her arms wide open. "They're going to try to dodge," I said, adjusting the stack of printed reports on the kitchen table. "Obfuscate. Talk in circles." Ellie sipped from her mug. "Let them talk. You've already burned the bridge behind them." The audit team arrived at 9:00 a.m. sharp. 3 investigators from the State HOA Regulatory Commission, plus a forensic accountant, and 1 representative from the Attorney General's office. Pete met them in front of the Pinebrook Estates HOA building, which until that morning had served more like Karen's personal palace. Karen, however, wasn't there. The building's doors were locked. No one from the board showed up. The audit team broke protocol. With a warrant signed the night before, they called a locksmith and gained entry by 9:47 a.m. What they found inside unraveled whatever thread Karen had left holding her illusion together. Boxes of records, many marked archive, but filled with blank or duplicated pages. A drawer in Karen's office labeled disputes crammed with dozens of complaint letters that were never acknowledged, each bearing notes in the margins in thick red pen. Push back, delay, threaten, lean. But the real find was in the storage closet. A desktop computer still powered on, logged into a spreadsheet titled Priority Residents. It was a list, names, addresses, comments like "silent for now, husband week, will crack soon," and Ellie's name underlined. Next to it, neutralize, watch husband, dangerous. The moment the investigator read that aloud to me, something changed in the room. The accountant stopped typing. Pete lowered his voice. That alone is enough to implicate intent. But there was more. A second document buried in an encrypted folder on Karen's desktop revealed internal communications between her and an LLC called Enforcecom Solutions, a shell contractor group registered in Delaware, with operations scattered across multiple HOA communities. The language was clear. Proceed with passive intimidation. Limit visibility of official HOA involvement. Maintain pressure on high-risk properties. Karen hadn't just turned Pinebrook into a surveillance zone, she had subcontracted enforcement. Paid goons. A private militia in polos and fake badges. I felt sick. Not just because of what she'd done to us, but because of how many others she'd likely done it to before. The news broke that afternoon. Lydia had embedded with the audit team and streamed a live update from her car outside the HOA building. The headlines spread like wildfire. State cracks down on rogue HOA, illegal enforcement network uncovered. Bintries. Former Special Forces trainer exposes neighborhood crime syndicate. I received over 40 emails that day. Some from people in Pinebrook, others from across the state, all thanking me, sharing their stories, asking how they could fight back too. I never wanted fame. I wanted safety. But if this storm was the price of that, so be it. By the end of the week, Karen Aldridge was formally charged with wire fraud embezzlement and conspiracy to intimidate. Louis Brandt and Doug Meeker were arrested for obstruction of justice and knowingly participating in unlawful private security operations. The HOA's charter was dissolved under emergency order, and a community-managed transition board was formed, run by 5 residents, including Ellie. It was poetic in a way. She'd gone from hiding behind blinds to sitting at the table where the real decisions were made. "I don't want to be in charge," she said when the neighbors nominated her. "I just want to make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else again." The crowd applauded. That was the day I knew we'd truly turned a corner. As part of the settlement, all residents fined under Karen's leadership received full reimbursement, plus a portion of the funds recovered from her LLC. The money didn't erase what had happened, but it made rebuilding easier. Some families moved away, choosing to start fresh elsewhere. Others stayed bound by the fire they'd walked through together. Me, I stayed right where I was. Because the house we bought, the life we tried to build it, was finally ours, no one else's. About a month after the charges, I got a letter. It wasn't from Karen directly. She'd been denied bail and was awaiting trial, but it was written in a script I recognized. Stiff, controlled, cold. D. You should have stayed quiet. You ruined something you didn't understand. Enjoy your hollow victory. I burned it without showing Ellie. Let Karen rot in her delusions. She had tried to rule through fear. She didn't understand what it meant to protect something. Because when you've spent your life in combat, you know something people like her never will. Real strength doesn't bark orders from a podium or hide behind fine print. Real strength holds your wife's hand in a hospital room and stays up all night building a case, not because you want revenge, but because no one else should have to suffer like she did. And real justice, it takes time, but when it comes, it doesn't knock. It bulldozes the whole damn fence down. The courtroom didn't look anything like the ones you see on television. It was smaller, plainer. No dramatic lighting or sweeping music, just rows of uncomfortable benches and a judge who spoke in clipped, exacting tones. But the air inside carried a weight that television could never convey. Every sigh, every tap of a shoe, every shuffle of papers echoed like thunder. It was the sound of people waiting for justice to finally speak. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her posture stiff, lips pursed, eyes hollow. The pristine pearl necklace she wore during HOA meetings was gone. So was her confidence. What remained was a hollowed-out version of the woman who once ruled a neighborhood with a clipboard and a smirk. Next to her sat 2 attorneys, both dressed sharply, both avoiding her gaze, as if she were a contagion they'd contracted by accident. I sat behind the prosecution's table, not as a witness yet, but as a husband. Ellie sat beside me, still healing her left arm, resting in a soft sling from nerve damage that might never fully repair. The bruises had faded, but what they left behind would never wash away. The courtroom filled with Pinebrook residents, people who once feared Karen, now staring at her with a mix of fury and quiet triumph. Dennis, Miriam, the Nguyen's. Even Taylor and Jen, who had just had their first baby the week before. They all came. Because this wasn't just about Ellie. It wasn't just about me. It was about every door Karen had knocked on. Every notice she'd mailed. Every whispered threat and manufactured fine that had held our neighborhood hostage. The prosecution began with the big picture fraud, embezzlement, abuse of authority. They showed the spreadsheet from Karen's computer, the financial trail from the HOA account to her private LLC. They explained how fines were inflated, fabricated, then siphoned through a legal loophole no one had ever thought to question. The jury watched silent. Then, they brought out the real evidence, the one that made the entire courtroom shift forward in their seats. The video of Ellie being assaulted. It wasn't crystal clear, but you could see enough. The way she stumbled backward into the fence. The moment one of the men shoved her. The quick flicker of pain across her face. Before the camera feed distorted and cut, the prosecutor turned to the jury. These men didn't act independently. They were paid, equipped, directed, and the woman who orchestrated it sat in this very courtroom under the illusion of power, pretending to serve the community she exploited. Karen's attorney objected. The judge overruled it, and then they called me to the stand. I walked slowly, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted every step to count. I took my oath, sat down, looked the jury in the eye, and told them everything. Not just the facts, the footage, the paperwork, the phone records, but the human cost. The nights Ellie couldn't sleep. The neighbors afraid to let their kids play outside. The veterans in the neighborhood who'd fought in wars only to come home and feel powerless against someone with a clipboard and a grudge. When the prosecutor asked me what I did before I retired, I told them I trained some of the toughest men in the world how to see danger before it arrives, how to protect people who can't protect themselves. And I missed this one because I never imagined I'd have to use those skills in my own backyard. Karen never looked at me. When Ellie took the stand, the entire courtroom leaned in. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She told them how the HOA first approached with smiles, then with warnings, and finally with violence. She said one sentence that hung in the air long after she stepped down. I didn't survive all those years waiting for Mark to come home just to be broken by someone like her. There was no rebuttal strong enough to counter that. The defense tried, claimed Karen never sanctioned violence, that the men were rogue hires, that she was misled by contractors, that she was unaware of financial mismanagement. But the jury wasn't buying it. Neither was the judge. After a 4-day trial, the verdict came swiftly. Guilty. On 6 counts: fraud, conspiracy, wire transfers for unlawful gain, harassment, falsifying public records, and incitement to intimidation. Karen was sentenced to 8 years in state prison with no chance of early release for the first 5. The judge called her actions a betrayal of trust so complete that it shattered the fabric of a neighborhood. Lewis and Doug each received 3 years for their roles in the scheme, and additional fines for obstruction. Enforcecom Solutions. The shadowy enforcement contractor was under federal investigation within the month. After the trial, people clapped outside the courthouse. Not wild cheers, just polite, quiet clapping. The kind that comes not from victory, but from relief. Pete put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You didn't just win, Mark. You changed something." And maybe he was right. But for me, it wasn't about changing the system. It was about Ellie. I walked her down the courthouse steps, sunlight hitting her auburn hair just right. And for the first time in months, I saw her smile without forcing it. We got home just before sunset. The wind chimes were back on the porch, brand new, but with the same tone. I had found a replacement the week before and hung them in secret. When she heard them ring, she stopped, and she cried, softly, fully. The kind of cry that doesn't come from fear or pain anymore, but from the weight of it finally leaving your chest. I held her. We said nothing. We didn't need to. The house was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel dangerous. It felt like home. In the weeks following the trial, Pinebrook Estates transformed. The white fences still stood. The children still played on their scooters, and the lawns remained neatly trimmed. But the fear that once shadowed every perfectly pruned bush, every overly polite wave, had dissolved. People spoke freely now at the mailbox in the park, even on the old HOA message board that had been converted into a community forum, no longer moderated by threats of fines and veiled warnings. Ellie and I spent our mornings on the porch again. She loved watching the sunrise, sipping coffee, as the sky melted from indigo to gold. Her recovery wasn't linear. Some days were harder than others. But the bruises had faded, and with each passing hour, she reclaimed pieces of herself that Karen had tried to take. I started gardening with her. Me, the guy who used to train special ops teams to breach compounds in the dead of night, now standing knee-deep in soil, pulling weeds and planting wildflowers. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I had to be on alert. Not because I'd stopped being vigilant, but because I had helped make this place safe again. Not just for us, for everyone. The temporary HOA board became permanent by unanimous vote. Ellie was officially elected president. She tried to decline, but the neighborhood wouldn't let her. Not after what she'd endured. Not after the quiet strength she'd shown. "We trust her," Miriam said, because she never asked us to fear her. Under Ellie's leadership, the HOA bylaws were rewritten from the ground up. No more vague aesthetic standards. No more arbitrary fines. Every rule required a 2/3 majority. Every decision had to be public and transparent. And perhaps, most importantly, no board member could serve more than 2 consecutive terms. One Saturday, the new board hosted a neighborhood BBQ in the park, the same park Karen once threatened to lock down after someone brought an unapproved bench cushion. This time the benches were covered in quilts, the grass dotted with coolers and kids and dogs chasing tennis balls. Laughter rang through the air without hesitation. I manned the grill. Tom stood beside me flipping burgers like it was a military op, calling out each one by doneness, like radio code. Medium rare, 2 o'clock, one crispy coming in hot. I hadn't seen him smile that wide since basic training. That afternoon, Ellie took the mic. She stood on a makeshift platform of 3 wooden crates and looked out over the crowd. I never wanted to lead anything, she began. And I never thought I'd be standing here after what this year has brought us. But I learned something. When you're quiet for too long, people think it means you're weak. But silence can be strength too. And when the time comes to speak to act, you do it not just for yourself, but for everyone who didn't know how. The crowd fell silent, not because of fear, but because her words wrapped around each of them like armor. She ended with a line that would echo around the community for weeks. We're not just neighbors now. We're witnesses, and that means we never forget. But we also never stop protecting each other. They gave her a standing ovation, and she deserved every second of it. Life moved forward. Karen remained in prison. She never apologized, never took responsibility, and eventually tried to file an appeal that was denied in under 10 minutes. Some said she never believed she'd get caught. Others thought she'd convinced herself it wasn't wrong at all. None of that mattered anymore. She was gone, and the scars she left behind were healing. One day, Ellie and I went for a walk through the backwoods trail behind our property. It was a cool autumn morning, leaves falling in slow spirals, the air rich with pine and quiet. As we turned the bend near the old stone wall, the one that used to mark the border between our yard and Karen's, we found something. A small wooden sign, hand-painted. No trespassing. Not because we fear you, but because we value peace. Ellie looked at me and smiled. I laughed. Wasn't me, I swear. Later, we found out Dennis had put it up, said it felt symbolic. We left it there. A few months later, a new family moved into Karen's old house. A young couple with twin girls full of curiosity and wild questions. Ellie brought over a casserole. I offered to help fix the fence in their backyard. When they asked about the neighborhood, I said only one thing. It used to be ruled by fear. Now it's built on watching out for each other. One evening, just before winter set in, Ellie and I lit a fire in the backyard. We wrapped ourselves in a blanket and sat side by side, listening to the crackle of wood and the distant hum of wind through trees. She leaned her head on my shoulder. You think it's really over? I looked into the fire, thought about what we'd survived, what we'd fought for, what we'd earned. No, I said softly, not over, just healed. A long pause. Then she whispered, You never told me what made you decide to fight back. I mean, really fight. I turned to her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. You? Me? I nodded. I spent years teaching men how to fight for things worth protecting, but I'd never had to protect what mattered most until they hurt you. That woke something in me I didn't know I still had. Her eyes welled up. I'm glad it did. I smiled. So am I. The fire burned low. The wind grew softer. The night pressed in around us, not with menace, but with comfort. And in that quiet moment, I realized something simple, something final. We weren't just safe. We were free. Not because we'd escaped the system or destroyed the rules, but because we had taken back what no one ever had the right to steal: our dignity, our peace, and the right to say no more. That's how you win against people like Karen. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with resolve, with truth, with each other. And now, whenever I hear the wind chimes on the porch, I know exactly what they mean. They mean we made it. Together.